Breakthrough.
You're watching Breakthrough News.
Very good to be back. Very good to be alongside you. I mean, we were together last week in Venezuela. Yes. Hopefully people saw you were actually even able to speak at a presidential event, which was pretty cool, I thought.
I had a conversation. I like to think of it as I had a conversation with Maduro with an audience watching.
Well, you did, in a way. Well, it still counts.
That's how I tell it to myself. No, it was an incredible experience. So you've been to Venezuela several times over the last couple of decades, in fact. However, this was my first time. So it was a really cool experience to get to do it together as the Breakthrough News team. And hopefully we'll get to go back. We got to go to the anti-fascism conference, which I think was very on point and timely.
Indeed. Well, we can swing back and talk more about that.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've got a great show lined up for you here today. We got a few guests that we want to just jump right into for time constraints. But before we do that, I do, of course, want to remind everyone, make sure you hit the subscription button. Make sure you hit the bell so you can get the alerts. We have a lot of fantastic things coming out, including quite a number of dispatches from Rania Khalek over the next few days, but also all of our other fantastic breakthrough content. Wait, Rania, I jumped the gun a little bit, so we don't have to move super fast here. But nevertheless, just remind people to subscribe, to make sure you hit the bell so you get the alerts. And of course, as we always mention, you can go to patreon.com/breakthroughnews and become a patron. Of course, all of your patronage is greatly appreciated in, really every possible way. And we appreciate all our patrons, everyone who's watching, and everything you've done to help us get us to where we are, including over 100,000 YouTube subscribers. I should have brought the plaque. They sent us a plaque, a little silver plaque. We'll have to put a picture of that online or something. It honestly is, no, it's not close to me now. But anyway, maybe we'll get it before the show is over or something like that. But it was very cool, and it's all due to all of you out there in listener land, or watcher land, however you want to call it. So we deeply appreciate you bringing us in. But no, I thought it was a good point that you made there, Rania. We were there for the anti-fascism conference. It was the 20th anniversary of the 2002 coup against President Hugo Chavez. We were also able to go to the Chavez tomb. I'm curious what your impressions were being there at the tomb specifically. I mean, it was a pretty powerful moment, I thought, to really reflect on the history of Venezuela, what they brought to the world, the machinations of imperialism.
Yeah, I know all of those things for sure. And of course, like you mentioned, it was the 20th anniversary of the US-backed coup attempt that it was actually successful for like 2 days back in 2002. And I thought the theme was really important because we're in a moment where we kind of have a resurgence of fascist movements around the world. And in Venezuela, the people that the US backs tend to be far right, in some cases fascists, as is the case across Latin America. So it was a really incredible experience because, the Hugo Chavez tomb, the kind of memorial that they've built around it, really plays up that moment as a moment where the people defeated this attempted fascist coup attempt, which is true. It was like a people defeated coup attempt. And it was really great to be in a place where not just reflecting on 2002, but we got to go to the march, this big national march, one of the days that we were there. And I've never seen that many people. I think it had to be at least 50,000. Some people were saying 100,000. Honestly, once you get to that number, it's really hard to tell, but somewhere between, let's say, 50 to 100,000 people were like in Caracas to celebrate the defeat of the coup in 2002, to celebrate Venezuela's socialist revolution that's ongoing, and to see that kind of people power, to see the support that exists for the government, for Maduro, who was quite a powerful speaker to see in person. We got a pretty front row seat to that. Coming from a place like the US where we don't have that kind of movement in the US, at least not now, where I've never really seen that level of people on the ground for something revolutionary and leftist, at least, in my life. That was a really incredible and inspiring experience. It makes you realize actually what is possible when people get organized. Yeah, go ahead.
No, definitely. I think that's so true. We also had the opportunity to go to several communes, but one where, in fact, there's a lot of conversation. And just before we got there, I think the Mission Vivienda, which is the housing mission, which builds, free, low-cost housing for people, I think had reached 5 million houses. Might be 4 million. Someone can correct me.
4
But
million,
anyway,
4 million.
4 million. We went
Yeah.
to one that I think is very interesting because the apartment complex is actually built by the people who live there. So they get the materials from the government. They set up their own situation, then they govern it communally. They also had like a community kitchen where they were feeding people who, are suffering from food insecurity to make sure there's good nutrition. They were doing different events for young people and things that were coming out of there. And, it wasn't really just their apartment block, but that had really become the center of kind of the broader communal conversation and discussion in the surrounding neighborhoods they were in, where we also had the chance to go. We went to a youth theater, saw a number of young kids put on a great play about a slave revolt, which I thought was pretty cool. They were great, I thought. So yeah, there's a lot there, a lot to be said.
Lot.
What's that?
We did a lot, actually.
We did a lot.
In a very short amount of time.
We did.
We did. It was really incredible. Sorry, continue. I'm just like, whoa.
No, I know it is funny because it's like so whirlwind, but obviously we're going to have some content coming out from that. Go ahead.
Yes. Also, I just wanted to note, you gave a fantastic speech on the first day about fascism, which I think I'm not sure if we've put a part of it out yet or if we will, but people need to keep their eye out for that too, because that was, I think, one of the best parts of the week. Eugene, you guys, you might not know this, Eugene is quite the speaker. I think they know. But in case you don't, Eugene is quite the speaker.
Thank you. Well, we want to turn to our first guest here. And it's really just unfortunate we have to even turn to this topic, but here we are yet again. The just ridiculous crimes of Israeli apartheid ongoing as always. And we are very honored to be joined as we continue the conversation by Hadeel Shatara, who is the coordinator of Samidoun, a Palestinian political prisoners' rights group. Woo. Hadeel, thank you so much for being back with us.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here again. First, I would like to send greetings to people around the world. Happy Easter for those who are celebrating Easter, and Ramadan Kareem for those who are celebrating Ramadan. I'm glad to be here again. Unfortunately, we're facing the same situation that we've been facing last year. So we're facing another attacks by the Zionist forces on the people in Jerusalem, in Gaza, and in different places around Palestine, in Jenin, Beta, and Nablus, and many, many other places.
Hadeel, it does seem like you mentioned facing the same thing as last year. It really does seem like a repeat of last year. We saw last week there was this massive Israeli attack on Al-Aqsa Mosque. We see people in towns in East Jerusalem like Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan are still facing eviction, ethnic cleansing. And when we see people across the occupied West Bank being shot by Israeli forces, particularly in Jenin, we see Gaza was being bombed last night. Are you fearful that this is going to lead to a repeat of last year in terms of the war on Gaza?
Well, actually, there's a huge chance that it would lead to this. But if you look at the situation right now, Palestinians has more power and more effect in media and in showing the world what's really happening. So yeah, this might lead to a war in Gaza, and this is something we all fear because we really don't want more death, more civilian deaths in Gaza. And we know how they attack. They start attacking houses and they demolish half of Gaza every time they attack. But they're not looking exactly for a war right now, but things are escalating fast. So you cannot guess what's going to happen tomorrow, because in one night, everything changes. That's why everyone is tensed of where the situation is leading right now and what's happening, because it's not only Jerusalem that is boiling, the whole West Bank and Gaza and the 48 occupied lands are boiling. If you look at Haifa and if you look at Nazareth and many other places in occupied Palestine 1948, you would see a massive number of arrests. There's a huge number of prisoners everywhere. We were commemorating the Prisoners' Day a few days ago, and if you look at the number of the people who are being imprisoned, you would be shocked. From Al-Aqsa Mosque itself, they captured 520 Palestinians, and these are not allowed to enter the old city of Jerusalem for a specific period of time. When Hamas stated that all these prisoners must be released, or else they were all released. So the situation is boiling, and we really don't know how it's going to escalate and what's going to happen for the coming days. But war is expected, yes.
You know, it really feels, I mean, almost surreal to watch some of what we've seen, certainly across Palestine, but also at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because on the one hand, the way it's described to, I think, most of us here in the United States is if there's some sort of, you know, co-equal clashes going on and that this is just some sort of response. And then you see the videos and they're just clubbing people randomly. But I was hoping you could speak to that aspect about how provocative what these settlers and Israeli police and others are doing, as opposed to being reactive, which is the way they're always presented in the United States.
Attacking civilians praying in a mosque is a provocative act. Allowing settlers, Zionist settlers, to enter a Muslim one of the most sacred places to all the Muslims around the world, with the way they attack the mosque is provocative. All the videos, all the footages, all the media coverage shows the reality that they're attacking people while they're praying. People are defending themselves with their shoes. They're attacking, they're bombing inside of a mosque. They have bombed tear bombs, tear gas bombs, rubber bullets. The number of injuries is huge. It's massive. In one night, 152 injuries. And this is happening every single night. Last night, we had 38 injuries by itself. They all suffered from rubber bullets. Many youth lost their eyes. Arresting 450 Palestinians in one night 6 days ago is crazy. They practically just went into the mosque, and when you're looking at people fully armed, wearing their armed suit, entering a mosque, arresting people who are just praying, that is provocative. They break the mosque, they broke the windows, they broke everything, and it's an insult. It's considered as a huge insult to touch these religious places the way they're doing. And all the footages and the media coverage shows the reality of what's happening there, and it shows that there are people who are unarmed facing a fully armed military forces.
You know, Hadeel, just one last question. I'm curious. Of course, all of this that you're experiencing across Palestine is happening as the world's attention is turned to the war in Ukraine. And as you've seen the sort of rhetoric from the Europeans and the Americans condemning the Russians, condemning, you know, saying war crimes and violations of international law without hesitation, right? Like right away, without even an investigation. How do you, as a Palestinian, view the reaction to what's happening in Ukraine from the Western countries versus what Eugene was just talking about, the way they react to Israeli violence against Palestinians?
Analyzing this leads us to go deeper into the subject. We have to look at the white supremacy that they're practicing all over the world. Because the Ukrainian people are blonde with blue eyes, then they are victims to war, and the actions are being condemned, the Russian actions. But because Palestinians and Afghanis and Iraqis are viewed as second-level civilians and second-class human beings, then killing them is allowed. So if we want to analyze this is how we view it. We view that these Western countries have double standards, but also the way they're using the human rights has been a mess since ever. They use it in terms of what's best for them. So it's not shocking to see them practicing all these acts. Even when they want to condemn that is happening in Palestine, they start from the fact that there are two states, and this is not the reality. Palestine was occupied by the Zionist forces, and it's our land from the river to the sea, and this is an occupation. So condemning this occupation, we have to condemn it as a whole. There's no such thing existing as an Israeli state. These are occupation forces that came to a country from everywhere else in the world, and they just came and occupied this land. So if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, yes, they would condemn it. They're supporting the NATO and the joining of the NATO. And the NATO, we know how much practices and of violence the NATO has practiced on many countries. Look at Libya situation today. Look at most of the Arab countries after the Arab Spring, or what's so-called the Arab Spring. You would see the real face of these Western countries. It's not shocking. They're funding occupation around the world. They're funding all the conflicts around the world. So it wouldn't be shocking to attack the Russians, because their fight with Russia is a historical fight, and it will continue. So they will condemn if white people are hurt, because to them white people deserve living, while other creatures and other people and other humans do not deserve to live. It's as simple as this, and this is not going to change. So our struggle is not only against the Zionist forces, it's against this white supremacy around the world. It's against colonialism, imperialism, and this city of capitalism that is created. This majesty of capitalism that is created to control the whole world. And this is how we view it, and this is how we look at it.
Well, quickly before we let you go, Hadeel, just for those who might be watching, how can they follow the work you all are doing at Samidoun?
You can go to our website, samidoun.net, and you can follow our Facebook page, our Twitter page. It's all called Samidoun, Palestinian Prisoners Network. And we really want you to join all of our activities and follow us on all social media and follow our page, because you'll find a lot of news about what's happening in Palestine and what's happening with Palestinian and international political prisoners around the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, Hadeel Shatara, as always, really appreciate you joining us here on the Freedom Side. Thank
you so much. I'm very honored to be here.
Pleasure is all ours. I mean, Rania, it's an ongoing issue. Obviously, it's been going on for many years. I mean, obviously prior to 1948, but it is. It's not shocking, but it is outrageous. The level of violence that's being visited on Palestinian people every day.
No, absolutely horrific. And keep your eye out. I have a big episode coming out tomorrow on this very issue.
Yeah.
Yes, on the same issue.
Well, we will be looking forward to it. But for those of you who are just finding out about Breakthrough News, maybe this is their first time watching, that's another good opportunity to remind you here to hit the subscribe button, hit the alerts. Then you don't have to go looking for it, because it will come looking for you. So don't forget, subscribe, hit the alerts. Rania.
I was just going to say, we got the lower third, patreon.com/breakthrough news. Become a patron, you guys. Become a patron.
Do it all.
And maybe you'll get like a special goodie. Did I say goodie?
You just offering people stuff now? It's not authorized. It's not authorized.
I meant like from Breakthrough News. I meant like an offer. Let's move on. Become a patron. End of story. I got to work on that. One week in Venezuela and I just lose it all.
Well, what can I say? There's a lot happening. Nevertheless, we want to turn a little bit. We were speaking just a touch about Ukraine, to some of the broader issues around Ukraine. Very honored to be joined here by a good friend of the show, Mike Prysner, who is a producer for the Empire Files and also an Iraq War veteran. Mike, thank you so much for being with us.
Yo, thanks for having me back.
Sorry, I had to drink a little coffee there. But no, it's funny, Mike. We were talking about doing this segment and, wanting to talk about Ukraine, and even figuring out like what that meant was such a challenging thing for us, because, at this stage, I think we're 57 days in or something close to that. We have it here at the bottom, the fog of war. Last week, Ukraine sank a ship, maybe they didn't sank a ship. The Russians took a town, maybe they didn't take a town. Someone's being killed here, maybe they're not being killed here. Maybe this was an accident, maybe it was deliberate. So it's like even the things that are happening, we're getting so many different stories at this point. It almost feels like that's one of the biggest challenges of this conflict, is to figure out if what is being told to us has any level of veracity or not.
I mean, that's true. I mean, especially a lot of the high profile incidents like the bombing of the maternity clinic. I mean, there was actually been like 4 or 5 different back and forths of this didn't happen, it was staged, it did happen, it didn't, and it's, so there's really no way to know. And I mean, I think that's true of all of the different things that have been picked up in the media. Obviously, it's advantageous for both sides in a war, especially a war like this, to be dictating the narrative and saying what's happening, because there's an information war that's really almost as important as the physical war on the ground. And so, of course, both sides are going to exaggerate what the other side is doing, deny what they're doing, and so forth. And so it's really everything that has come out can turn out to be completely fake or completely true. And so that's, I guess, I think one of the things people have to keep in mind when they are watching what's happening. We don't know what's happening. We do know overall what's happening, and that the war is really brutal. A lot of people are dying. A lot of people are being refugees. Cities are being completely destroyed. And I think that, of course, we don't know who's doing what and all of that at different points. I think that one of the things that you could keep in mind, though, is don't doubt something because it seems outrageous or irrational and illogical. I think there's a lot of naivete about war and the realities of war, especially when a war is an invasion and an occupation of another country. Things like logic and rationality completely go out the window, especially when there is a heavy fight. And so it could be easy to say, oh, well, Russian soldiers would never do this, Ukrainian soldiers would never do this, because it hurts their cause, it makes them look bad or whatever. Once you're taking heavy losses on the ground, which both sides very much are taking heavy losses, all those things about logic and what will look good to the media are completely go out the window. War can make good people and well-meaning people very bad very quickly. War also makes people who are already bad much worse very quickly. And so this is just something to keep in mind. It's hard to know what's happening, but a lot of the things that I see come out that people think are impossible to have happened seem pretty standard for wars like this.
Yeah, Mike, I think that's a problem on all sides of this war, of course, is like everybody wants to believe their side is winning. Everybody wants to believe their side is pure and can do no wrong. And of course, because, we're in the sort of US media ecosystem, it's all one-sided for the most part. It's that, the Russians are purely evil and all they do is commit atrocities, and the Ukrainians are pure and beautiful and like don't, look too hard at what the Azov battalion stands for. But I thought it was interesting because, when we talk about the fog of war, it's also about, we're dumping an insane amount of weapons. Well, not we, but obviously the US government and all these Western governments are just dumping an insane amount of weapons into Ukraine. They don't know where those weapons are actually even going. I mean, you now have US officials. There was an article from CNN saying that they don't actually know where the weapons are going. So, and this is a quote from one, some intelligence official. Some of those weapons may wind up in the hands of other militaries and militias that the US did not intend to arm. There's that. There's also, I thought it was interesting that in the same piece, and this is CNN, you guys, so don't call it Russian propaganda, it says privately, officials recognize that Ukraine has an incentive to give only information that will bolster their case for more aid, more arms, and more diplomatic assistance. It's a war. Everything they do and say publicly is designed to help them win the war. Every public statement is an information operation. Every interview, every Zelensky appearance broadcast is an information operation. So these are like Western intelligence officials saying this to CNN. And I just raised that to show that like on every level, the fog of war makes it almost impossible to know what's actually happening on the ground or where all of these weapons are even going.
For sure. I mean, it's very advantageous for the US government for there to be the fog of war and to people not to actually know what's happening on the ground, or to just be able to see pictures and video and attribute it to whatever and then say this is, of course, it's being used by the US cynically to say this is why you should accept, Biden just, of course, announced today an additional $800 million in weapons and ammunition and things like that, in addition to a lot of other funding for Ukrainian military forces and things like that, because they want to use their snippets of information to present things as the only solution to this crisis right now is to dump as many weapons as possible into it, so there can be this, heroic defeat of the Russian invasion. But I haven't seen, as Biden's making these big announcements and the White House is touting it, and of course the corporate press is very much, this is their big goal is to make sure there's more funding going into the weapons industry for this. I haven't seen any of them talk about what can really end the war much sooner than a military victory by the Ukrainians. Sure, the war could end if in however long it takes for the Ukrainian military to defeat the Russian military. Sure, that would end the war after probably tons of death. Probably, I don't know if that would take years or what, but that's a pretty long-term ending the war strategy. You don't really see any talk about what could end the war really quickly, which is a settlement, some kind of peace negotiations that the United States could be playing a hugely major role in. But of course they are not. And it's important to remember that Zelensky was elected by a pretty large majority in the Ukrainian election. I actually believe it was by the largest share of votes ever in a Ukrainian election. And that's without certain regions voting that probably would have voted Zelensky, because one of his main platforms was on peace and kind of resolving the tensions that are happening. He even, spoke in Russian during his campaign to appeal to Russian-speaking people. So he really was elected on a mandate for avoiding this kind of thing altogether. And it shows that there is a great deal of sentiment of people in Ukraine, not wanting things to come to the point that they have. Of course, Russia probably lost a lot of that sympathy by doing the invasion, and probably a significant portion of the Ukrainian population that was more sympathetic to Russia may not be anymore, just by nature of the country being bombed and them having to flee their homes and so forth. But it just goes back to say that there is other solutions to what's happening, or good solutions other than just dumping more and more weapons into it. And that just kind of goes back into this idea of what is beneficial for the US government, for people to see and know about the war. They want these stories of just, it's the final stand of the Ukrainians. If we don't send them all this more artillery, they're going to get wiped out and it's going to be our fault. And so they're using this fog of war very much to their advantage as a boon for the military industrial complex, but of course for the interest of the US government to wage this proxy war against Russia, which they obviously have no interest in ending soon, and probably is good for them for it to go on for a long time.
Well, I'm glad you raised that issue of the U.S. sort of doubling down on war, because the other thing that we're seeing over the past week is the Army is now offering, I think, $65,000 or up to $65,000 for people to pay their student loans if you sign up. And I think apparently there's an extra bonus, I think like an $8,000 bonus if you can ship in 5 days. Even the way it sounds is wild. Yeah. The Air Force offering $50,000 to people as a signing bonus, up to $50,000 as a signing bonus. It certainly makes sense to me why they might need to offer money to get people to fight. But it just feels so perverse, Mike, that they're using this moment to really prey on people's biggest challenges to, throw them into the maw of the war machine.
Sure. Well, there studies show, and there's surveys done on this all the time, most people who join the military, it's a college education thing. It's to get money for college. It's not for a career. It's not to be part of the American military for their whole life. It's a means to an end. It's, I'll do this short stint in the military. I'll get my college paid for. What's interesting about what you mentioned, the student debt repayment initiative that the military is doing, is that that's kind of a shift. It used to be you join the military first to get money to go to college to begin with. But the emergence of the student debt crisis over the past decade or so, now it's like people who go to college, and it's targeting people primarily who don't graduate from college, because this isn't like an officer program where, oh, you have your degree, join and become an officer. It's for people who dropped out of college and have a lot of debt. And they say that specifically in their thing. It's people, like with the general who came up with the program said, people start college and then plans change. And it's like, well, for working class people, it's not just plans change is why you drop out of college. It's inability to afford it, family obligations, life getting in the way, as it were. So they're targeting people who had to drop out of college, don't have a degree, nothing to show for the money they spent, and they have a lot of debt. But here's where it gets a little wild. So there's only, they tout this thing, and really a lot of this is just geared towards getting people in the front door of the recruiting office, saying, we'll pay $65,000 of student debt if you join the military, if you join the Army right now. That's not the case. There's different levels of it, but to get the student debt forgiveness, it's only in particular jobs. And right now, there are only 4 jobs in the Army that they are offering the student loan debt repayment for. let's talk about some of these jobs. Okay, so one of the jobs, of the 4 jobs, one of them is shower and laundry specialist, responsible for overseeing care of personal laundry and shower operations. So joining the
Oh.
military on a 4 to 8 year contract to do laundry in a giant laundry room of just like shit. Uh,
Wow.
so that's one of the jobs, and that's like one of the hardest jobs the Army has to recruit for. So all of these jobs that nobody wants is what they
Mm.
throw these big initiatives at. So it makes it look a little less appealing. Another one of these jobs, transportation management coordinator, which is a truck driver, pretty much. Those are the most of the people that got killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Just people on pointless supply chain operations, just driving around in trucks, waiting to get blown up. But the best one on this list, this is how you get your $60,000 student debt repaid, is to sign up for 48 years doing mortuary affairs specialists. And so that is dealing with all the bodies of civilians and soldiers who are killed on the battlefield. So
Wow.
that's a pretty hefty price to pay to get your student loan debt repaid, is to just manage the body parts and putting them together and putting them in the little box that they put on the plane and so forth. So it's kind of rough. I think it's not a coincidence that the Army is unveiling this plan now after hopes of student loan debt being forgiven is out the window. I mean, I was extremely hopeful that, okay, maybe Bernie would win and he definitely would cancel all student debt. And so I think there was a lot of people that were holding out saying, I got this debt. We have these deferments because of COVID, so I don't have to pay it right now. And maybe there's momentum building for this just being forgiven, where I don't have to worry about it anymore. Biden even promised to forgive a certain amount of it. And then now they're pretty open in saying, we're not even touching this campaign promise of this kind of minimum guarantee of $10,000 in student loan debt repayment. So now that the optimism and the hope has been completely dashed by the White House, now the Army is coming out and saying, you know what, we'll take care of some of that student loan debt for you if you don't mind picking up body parts and trying to match them to the person who is blown apart. And honestly, the same is true for the Air Force offering this big, cash initiative for people to join the Air Force. I mean, first of all, the only way you get over $10,000 in this cash bonus is if you join for 6 years or more. So that's a pretty big obligation. People don't realize that these bonuses are spread out month by month over the term of your entire contract. So $10,000, even $50,000 isn't that much when you think about it broken up over 12 months a year for 6 years or longer. That's, you're getting a little extra in your paycheck. And again, these Air Force jobs are only offering them for like 2 or 3 Air Force jobs. And they're things like unexploded ordnance disposal. So you go and try to defuse the IED and hope you don't get blown up when you're defusing it. So it's for the most high risk jobs that a lot of people don't want because they're, smart enough to not want them. So it's obviously it's preying on people, but it's not just offering, okay, we'll pay your college fee, your loan debt if you come into the Army, do 4 years in the Army. You have to pay a hefty price to get these benefits.
I guess if you want free healthcare, you also have to. I mean, it's amazing. It's like the only socialized institution or only institution that practices any level of socialism in the United States is the military. If you want anything, if you want free healthcare, if you want subsidies for college, if you want subsidies for a mortgage, like you do get all of these benefits. You just have to also maybe die.
That's true. And, it's important to remember that wasn't always the case in the United States. I mean, when there was a strong labor movement, there were guarantees for housing assistance and healthcare and education assistance and training and all the things that drop people into the military now. That did exist for a lot of jobs in the United States, for a certain demographic of people in particular. And the more that's been eroded, right, the military has been pretty much the only place remaining that has maintained these types of benefits. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a draw. And, it's a combination of things that recruiters rely on. I mean, of course they rely on economic distress. In fact, the number one school that's targeted by recruiters are the tier 1 schools, the one that have the highest percentage of low income students. And so there's this obviously preying on anxieties about jobs and college and so forth. But the other thing that they prey on is just youthful ignorance. I mean, these programs start targeting kids like under 12 years old. I mean, I think the young Marines, you can join when you're like 7 or 8 or something like that. In fact, the American Civil Liberties Union called Army recruiting practices so extreme that they, quote, undermine the voluntary nature of enlistment. I mean, and this student loan debt forgiveness thing and these cash initiatives, they're coming also not just on their own, but with this other huge rollout that we saw, I think early last year, was this investment in Army esports and having recruiters literally just putting on a headset, playing Call of Duty all day, and then randomly talking to young teenagers who are playing Call of Duty and being like, hey, do you want to do this for real? Like, I'm a recruiter, you can, whatever. And which is like straight up just like sneaking into your living room. Your parents just think you're playing video games, and actually you're talking to a recruiter when you're on Twitch or something like that, or just on Xbox or whatever. So it's really nefarious. And, they have to employ these kind of things because just if they don't, not a lot of people join. And I think it's, the recruitment numbers show that at times of greater economic distress, there's more people joining. But even then, the military really does have to try hard to lure people in.
Yeah, I remember when I was in high school, the Marines had a club, and the theme of it was that they would help you figure out your life and what you're going to do after graduation. And amazingly, despite all the jobs that exist, they always said one of the steps was to join the Marine Corps. But, they would help you with your homework and all this other stuff that people need. Well, let me ask you this, Mike, because you've been through this process. There are obviously so many millions of kids who are just trying to figure it all out. I mean, what's your message to young people who are getting all these messages from the video games, from the recruiters, maybe even from people around them, that this is a good deal, that they should join the military in order to improve their lives?
I think one of the best pieces of data that can illustrate this is I think a lot of people are aware of the suicide epidemic in the military. One suicide a day in active duty military was a statistic for a long period of time. And I think there's an assumption, and I think it is the common assumption is this is a result of post-traumatic stress from the deployments to wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that people they go through really horrific experiences, and then that leads to their ultimate suicide. Most of the people who commit suicide in the military have not deployed at all. And so that shows that a lot of people who come into the military thinking that it's an escape, that you can make your life actually better by getting out, they end up in the military and they see that their life has gotten quite a bit worse and more difficult. You're away from your friends, you're away from your family, you're in a kind of highly restrictive situation. It's not everything a recruiter promised. In fact, the number one thing you hear in basic training is my recruiter lied to me. I mean, it's just kind of the mantra that young recruits have. And so just knowing this great deal of hardship that active duty people experience, I mean, clearly it's if you think it's a way that's going to make your life better, talking to people in the military would obviously tell you a very different story, and that measures up to not only statistics, but most people get the hell out of the military as soon as they can, even if they join thinking that it was going to be a career thing. Something like over 70% of people get out as soon as their contract are up. And that doesn't even count the people that find ways to get out before. So if it was so great, like all these recruiters promise, everyone's pretty anxious to get out at the first moment they can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to note what you're talking about reminds me of even the New York Times recently had this piece that got rightfully mocked in the last few days, but it was that drone crews have killed more people than nearly anyone else in the military in the past decade, but they seldom got the same recovery periods or mental health screenings as other fighters, the unseen scars of those who kill via remote control. I'm not joking. That's literally what the New York Times said, but that does speak to something of what you're talking about, is even those that don't get deployed, the military is a pretty miserable experience.
Yeah, for
even
sure.
for
And
the remote control killers.
Yeah. And there's definitely been drone operators who have become conscientious objectors or become part of the resistance and quit their jobs. Daniel Hale, in prison for leaking information about the drone program. But yeah, I mean, this was like, it just goes like they target people for this job because it's like, oh, you can do this cool video game type style killing. And then, it's just all cool. And it's like you're this, high technology secret agent type person or whatever. But yeah, I mean, they don't take care of anyone in the military that well, let alone people that they deem as like not deserving of it as much. But yeah, I mean, it's I think it just speaks to just just how weird and gross the military of the US empire has become, that there's even an issue of you have this high number of people that are just killing people with computers all day who are like left behind. And it's like, the crazy part about that story to me is not that they're not giving people the right treatment or whatever. It's the fact that we have all these people in a room blowing people up all day, something that's been shown to have like a over 90% civilian casualty rate or something like that. And that's kind of accepted as just like the norm. But then it's a story all of a sudden when it's like, oh, these people are traumatized and they need adequate mental health care. It's like, well, why is this kind of an acceptable reality to begin with, that there are these rooms all over the country filled with people that are pushing these buttons and killing people?
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, before we let you go, I mean, you guys are doing a ton of great stuff at the Empire Files. For those who are out here watching who aren't already following you, I don't know what you're doing, or can they follow you for all of the fantastic stuff you have coming up?
Yeah, well, you can find Empire Files on YouTube, social media, podcast also. So just look for Empire Files anywhere and you'll find it everywhere in different forms.
Yeah, great merch too, but couldn't recommend it more highly. Mike, thanks so much for joining us. I know you got a lot going on. Appreciate you giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
No, happy to.
Of course. Well, Rania, I mean, it really is like, honestly, when I saw that army thing, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, I thought Mike put it pretty well. This time last year, people are thinking, oh, student debt, that could be gone. And now it's like, oh, sorry, you want to get rid of student debt, you have to, go and join the military and do these terrible things.
I actually thought to myself, I can pay off a big portion of it, but I'm going to wait because Biden might actually take some of it away. I actually thought that. Like even me who like is so cynical, I was like, yeah, for sure. He can't not get rid of some student debt. But yeah, here we are.
I mean, it seemed like $10,000. He said he was going to do it. It seemed pretty straightforward. I thought, he won't get rid of it. He'll get rid of some of it, right? But no, he just keeps pushing back the date of repayment so there's not like a revolt of young people before the midterm elections. And I promise you, I don't know when the next start date is, but if it's before the elections, I promise you it will get pushed back at least one more time until after the first Tuesday of November for sure. You think so? Yeah, they're definitely not going to make people pay before they vote. Well, maybe actually the day you vote
is when
the day after will be the day that your payments return. They'll be like, oh, hey, by the way. But no young people are going to vote really anyway.
To be fair, that money is better spent on like the yachts of whoever. Again, it's under investigation at Breakthrough News. Who is making all the money off of student loan debt? We're not quite sure where it's going.
I have so many questions.
Definitely someone's yacht. Definitely someone's yacht.
Well, maybe one of Betsy DeVos's 5 yachts. Shout out to whoever
or like
that
mercenaries
person was who that yacht.
Or somehow our student loan debts are like funding mercenaries in Ukraine. Who knows?
It seems plausible. Honestly, if no matter what you told me bad was happening around the world, if you said the way they paid for that was like securitizing U.S. student loans, I would believe it. Like there's nothing.
Like Mexican drug cartels.
It's such a predatory industry. It just has to be involved. We're going to go to our next guest in a second, but I just have to say, I'll never forget when I got my first student loan. And I'm about to get off the phone. I've gotten this, relatively small amount of money. And the woman goes, hey, wait, where are you going to live? And I was like, I guess I'm just going to like live on campus and apply to live, first in my second year, apply to live in a dorm. She's like, well, why would you do that? She was like, why don't you just like get an apartment off campus? And I was like, well, I can't afford that. And she was like, well, why don't you just take out a bigger loan? And I was like, well, I don't know. It sounds like kind of a bad idea. And she was like, don't worry about it. It's not like you have to pay it off until after you graduate anyway. And I was like, wow, that's actually kind of a good point. And she was like, okay, cool. So I'm going to just up this $20,000 more. And I was like, great, sounds good. And it just, that was the whole thing. And the school, by the way, told me to apply for this. They were like, oh yeah, you should go to this bank and apply for student loans. So yeah, the level of sort of just predatory reality. I was 19 years old. What do I know? I was 18 actually at the time, but like they were just, laying it on thick. I guess I had a great apartment for a couple of years. I can say that much.
I gotta say, like, that is so predatory. That's incredible. Just like, I do remember they had a class in high school on how to write a check.
Yeah,
they never taught us. They never gave us a class on like how not to take out more loan than you can handle. They also made it seem like you were just gonna get a really good job after college. You're gonna go to college.
Totally.
You're gonna make $500,000 a year. It's gonna be super easy to pay off.
The banks, the schools, they're all so complicit. So complicit. Well, talking about people definitely not treating people the way they deserve or paying them what they have earned, we want to turn to the issue of Starbucks, where there's a fantastic wave of union organizing taking place right now all across the country. And we are very honored to be joined by Jay Fletcher, who's a 6-year partner and shift supervisor at the Huguenot Village Starbucks, which just voted to unionize. Jay, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We're excited to be here.
No, we're really excited to have you. Congratulations, by the way. And, I guess my first question for you is just, what is motivating so many folks working at Starbucks all across the country to turn towards unionization in this moment?
Well, ultimately, a lot of it is about respect for me. We just feel like, since the pandemic, Starbucks has done so much to make the customer experience better, but they're doing it at our expense. So we're going through these really hard, difficult days throughout the pandemic, and we just haven't got enough from our own company to take care of us and make sure we're taken care of. So we're going to do it ourselves now.
One question I have for you, and I'm just sort of curious about, but I think it's one that it's important, is, you all were really the front lines of the pandemic. Maybe some Starbucks were closed, but I was certainly going through Starbucks all the way through. And it just feels like after everything that's happened, after everything I'm sure people have been through, that, for the company to still almost be acting like you all are asking for some great thing to just want to be represented democratically in your own workplace is just galling. It's bad all the times, but it feels like an extra slap in the face.
Yeah, definitely. The one where it did it for me, in the first summer of the pandemic, the current CEO Kevin Johnson said, spirits have never been higher, when that was a blatant lie. And like we were struggling every single day. We had to have people who are autoimmune disorders take leave of absence just to not come into work anymore and stuff like that. So they kept our benefits, and everything, but we were still struggling on that front, definitely.
And what did you see from the company in terms of anti-union activity? Were they putting a lot of pressure on people? What kind of things were they telling you about why you should or shouldn't do certain things? What was that atmosphere like?
So a lot of things. There's a lot of just posters and flyers going around saying once you unionize, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't transfer stores, you will be stuck at your current pay rate. I had my district manager pulled me off the floor one day to tell me that the only way I can really make my job better is if I had a better attitude, and just gave me a whole hour-long lecture about how my attitude was why my job wasn't good enough for me.
Wow.
That's incredible. It's interesting because Starbucks does try to portray itself as a sort of progressive corporation. Especially around issues of race, right? Starbucks has had some scandals in the past, and then they're like, well, we're gonna give a lesson to all our employees on how important it is to not be racist or whatever other bigotries exist. So how does Starbucks's image, I guess, or how is it as a worker at Starbucks when you see them putting out this attempt at a progressive image versus how they're actually treating their workers?
I definitely feel like they're coming up short on this one. When the two African Americans were asked to leave the Starbucks, I think Philadelphia, we closed down for a day to do sensitivity training, which was the right move. It was like, hey, this is what happened. We're going to change moving forward. And now it just kind of feels like they don't. I don't know. I feel kind of betrayed at times, honestly. It just kind of sucks, really.
No,
Yeah,
I hear you.
imagine so.
It really is. And some of the things I saw Howard Schultz say something about how Starbucks is doing NFTs, and I don't know how that was supposed to affect workers, but that it's going to be good for everybody. And you just wonder sometimes, who's advising these people. But, I'm also just curious how it's felt to you, Jay, to see this sort of, I almost call it a firestorm. I remember one day I just see one Starbucks is organizing. I think the first one was in Rochester or Buffalo. Then I turn around and it just feels like it's the whole country. There's, hundreds and hundreds of stores now, and they're winning elections. I mean, how does that feel to see your coworkers and colleagues around the country really lean into this union organizing drive?
It feels incredible. A couple years ago, this was unimaginable. This was like unionizing was the joke that we would say, and then Buffalo partners actually went out and did it. And like, hang on, we have a better say. We can actually do this. We can actually come together and make our work lives better. So it's great, and we're on Zoom calls every week with partners around the country, just supporting each other. And it's honestly, it's like the most wonderful thing in the world. It's like there's solidarity here.
Mm-hmm.
And in a country like America, where like the idea of unionization is not as common as it used to be, can you tell us, like, what does it mean? What does it mean for workers now that this has happened at Starbucks?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
I said, like, what does it mean? Like, what does it mean now that Starbucks employees are unionized? What is the benefit that workers will have who are at Starbucks?
First off, we're just looking for a livable wage. None of us are making that right now. Like here in Richmond, Virginia, livable wage is $17.22. I'm still not making that as a supervisor. My partners are way under me and that too. So first off, that's the first thing. Other things are like, we want to respect turnaround time. So sometimes partners are asked to close and leave the store at 9:30 and then be back in the morning for open at 4:30 in the morning. And that's definitely not enough time to go home and get like enough sleep. Things like guaranteed tips and sometimes if you have a call out, if a call out happens, the company absorbs that paycheck. Like the company keeps that money. So what we're asking for is if a person calls out, that paycheck that would have happened is redistributed to the partners that are there for the day.
I mean, that sounds so fair. I don't even know what to say. I mean, that's the bare minimum I think that you guys deserve. All I know is whenever I'm in Starbucks in the middle of rush hour, I mean, hats off. I don't know how you do it. And, it's one thing that I'm also curious what you'd say to others. I mean, obviously there's 9,000 Starbucks, I think, or something like that all around the country. I'm sure there are many Starbucks workers looking at what you all are doing. What kind of messages would you send to those folks about they may be thinking about unionizing, they might be a little scared about how to take that first step and maybe from your own experience, what that was like and why they should do the same?
The first thing I would say is you can do it. You can absolutely do it. There's not a lot legally that the company can do against you. And now that we're more outspoken and now that we're public, we're protected in that, right? We're protected in the public eye right now. And I would just say, talk to your partners, talk to the people next to you, ask them what they're looking for and come together and come up with a plan. Talk to organizers, see if it's right for you. If it's not right for you, that's fine. Like we don't need, not everyone needs to be in a union. So that's totally fine if they choose not to, but whatever is right for them, they have the power to do so.
No, well, that's, I think, an important piece. And I'm, looking forward, you say that you guys are on Zoom calls every week, you're talking more. So, I mean, this might sound obvious, but I think it's worth saying there are no plans on stopping this campaign. The ball is rolling here and you all are going to keep pushing.
Yeah, I think we're over 200 stores have petitioned and plenty more to come. We have at least 5 more stores in Virginia coming up in the next month.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Well, Jay, we really appreciate you. Good luck on the contract struggle there. You got the union, you get the contract. It's tough. And I know Virginia, not only is the most friendly state, but I think there's so many of us all around the country and around the world that are looking at what y'all are doing and are feeling super excited about it. So I appreciate you taking some of your very valuable time to join us here on the Freedom Side.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No, of course. Yeah, I mean, to me, this is one of the most inspiring stories out there. I think that anyone who follows labor, it's always said that, places like Starbucks, like Amazon can't unionize those places, never going to happen, companies too powerful, blah, 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 blah. Everything you always hear about why you can't do it. Here we go.
little by little, right?
And
You
that's
got
Richmond, Virginia.
Amazon in New York. Yeah, exactly. The real Virginia, as you like to call it, Eugene.
Yeah, the real Virginia, where you don't have the right to a union because it's a right to work state, including if you're a public employee, by the way, who are banned from collective bargaining in the state of
Wow.
Virginia. Or at least they used to be. Maybe that's changed now, but it's certainly very difficult
Well,
state.
I wouldn't know. I'm not a real Virginian, so.
Yeah, well, listen, you say what you want to say about where you're really from. You want to shout out Martine Hernandez in the super chat who donated $10 and said you can use it for some of your debt, Rania. Well, I guess we'll have to
Thank
collectively
you.
discuss that.
Yeah. We can split it, Eugene. 5 goes to yours, 5 goes to mine. I think that's fair.
Shout out to, it's an interesting name, KGB Arthur made a couple donations there.
That's awesome.
Someone gave us nearly $20. Sorry, I can't really pronounce your screen name, but shout out to you 100%. Really appreciate that. And Stephanie Pavlik, who sent a message of solidarity to all Palestinians. Very happy to have had all you here in the chat. And sorry, we sort of fell asleep at the wheel a little bit there on the super chat. But yeah, no, I mean, it really is, we cover a lot of union stories here. We've covered a lot over the past year. And, I think it's important for people to see that if you fight, you can win. It's tough, but you can stand up and you can do something even in places where, people didn't think it was possible. And I think that this is going into the rest of this year, one of the stories that I really hope people continue to watch, how there is this expanding move by people at places where maybe they didn't expect it to go out and to organize. And there's a number of big ones on the horizon coming up in the next couple years. But no, it is exciting to see people at Starbucks who, I said it once before, I mean, how can they not deserve to be treated better in every possible way? I mean, honestly, it seems like, I don't know, the way people treat people who work there, the speed of what's going on, how angry people get if one little thing is wrong.
Yeah.
They're putting up with a lot. So shout out to them.
Yeah, indeed. Especially the Starbucks that are at airports.
Couldn't
that's
be
the
me.
worst one to work
Respect.
at. Yeah. No, people at airports are angry, they're upset, especially these days because airlines. This is just me going back to my story.
No,
from over the
are you going to give a whole? So should we cancel the next guest so you can give a whole soliloquy on the airline industry being wrong?
I think we should. I'm sorry to all of those people we invited on, but I have a lot to say about the American airline industry. No,
well, the good news is that you put out like a 13-tweet thread, so everyone can go to @Rania.
I became one of those people, but they deserved it.
You did, but I don't think you actually tagged the airline. So that you did.
No, because they weren't the only one that was the problem. That's why I was like, they're all bad. Like every airline was just canceling flights left and right, and people were stranded. It was actually horrible. It was horrible because of all the families I saw sleeping overnight at the airport who had no way of getting home. But anyways, the point is the Starbucks. I was the Starbucks employee. I was like in line trying to get a coffee, and the line was so long and people were so mean and angry. And I was like, God, these poor baristas. Just like getting all of that anger at the airline industry was getting shouted at them. And anyway.
Yeah. Well, before we leave the topic, I'll just say if you happen to be watching and you are a Delta Airlines associate of any sort, flight attendants, other employees in Delta organizing right now with AFA-CWA. They're in airports around the country. Visit the table. Great union. Does a great job for flight attendants at many airlines. But on that note, we want to turn to maybe the most critical existential issue overhanging everything we do every day, and that is the climate catastrophe we are currently in. And we are very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Cassie Siegel from the Center for Biodiversity. She's the director of the Senate's Climate Law Institute. Cassie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. And I want to start here with those of us who are, I don't know, am I in the know? I don't know. Those of us who are quote unquote in the know, you've read so much about this that when you see things like we have to prevent a 1.5 degree warming and getting to 2 degrees, 3 degrees is dangerous. But what that really means, I think, for a lot of people, it's not clear and it's a little obscured. So maybe just to set the tone, can you talk about what the stakes are in terms of the 1.5 degrees warming and what happens once we get beyond that goal?
There's many horrendous consequences of going beyond that 1.5 degree guardrail. And that's why government officials from the countries that are most at risk and climate activists everywhere for many years have been saying 1.5 to stay alive, and 2 degrees is too much.
Mm.
And just a couple of examples. So above 1.5 degrees, these unheard of superstorms become more common. So Hurricane Ida, that devastated the Gulf Coast, and then it moved up to the New York area. There was massive flooding. It killed 50 people. That type of deadly, horrible storm happens with more frequency and ferocity all over the world. Melting ice is another example. So melting ice causes sea level rise of 1 to 3 feet in this century. That puts 4 million people in U.S. coastal cities alone at risk. And then all over the world, huge coastal cities like Saigon, Mumbai, Bangkok could be mostly underwater. And keeping warming under 1.5 degrees, it cuts that sea level rise in half, protects millions of people, not to mention our ice-dwelling friends like polar bears and penguins. And then because of ocean heat waves, another example is coral reefs. Over 1.5 degrees, we will have a complete loss of the world's coral reefs, affecting marine ecosystems that will be starved of food resources. And if we keep warming below that, we can save a portion of the world's reefs, or at least give them a chance.
Wow.
You know, Cassie, that sounds really terrifying what you just described. And of course, right now, it seems like no matter what party's in charge, we continue on this horrible path to just like climate ruin. And Biden has recently made a few decisions that are going to make this worse. One of them is adding ethanol into our gas. And then the other one is, of course, opening federal lands for oil companies to lease. Can you talk a bit about what these decisions mean and how it will actually impact climate change?
Yeah, so first on ethanol, when you add ethanol, which is essentially alcohol, think of it like adding vodka to the gas tank, it actually increases the amount of ozone smog pollution that's produced when you drive the car. And ozone, it essentially burns our lungs. So it causes and exacerbates diseases like asthma, particularly for children whose lungs are still developing, and then for the elderly who may have other respiratory illnesses. So adding ethanol, it does not actually help the climate. It will not actually reduce gas prices, hardly, if at all. It's the wrong decision. The only way to protect people from the high prices at the pump, from the profiteering by big oil, is to get off oil altogether. We have the technology to do that. So that is the only way. Give people direct relief in the immediate term, as Congress did for COVID. But these gimmicks like ethanol are absolutely the wrong direction. And then on the oil leasing, and I think this is implicit in your question, but just to say, fossil fuels are what causes climate change. 85% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions come from oil, gas, and coal. Yes, of course, there's other things that contribute, but that is by far number one. And the fossil fuel executives who decided to lie about the science and block alternatives to their dirty products, and they're still doing it today, that is the primary cause. And nobody has more direct power to stop the growth of fossil fuels than Joe Biden. And his actions overall have been a mix of things that are not good enough and then things that take us in exactly the wrong direction, like the recent decision to restart the leasing program. The federal government owns and holds in trust for the public tremendous amounts of oil, gas, and coal rights. And it is madness for the U.S. government to keep auctioning these off for development. So every single step in this program, every lease sale will be protested by people all around the country and will be challenged in court because it's just an absolutely disastrous decision.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of the technology, because I feel, especially with this issue of the oil and gas leases, I mean, it feels, certainly the fossil fuel companies are obviously promoting this, but I think that there is still this lingering sense in people's minds that Yes, it would be good to just get into all clean energy, but that somehow we actually can't do that yet, or that there's something that's missing, or whatever it may be. So I was hoping you could speak to that, because I do think that misconception plays a big role in why people are sort of like, well, it'd be nice to do more, but what can we really do?
Yeah, so the passenger fleet is like the low hanging fruit sector, right? I mean, with the electric zero emission vehicles are on the road today. They are better than petroleum cars, and they're getting cheaper all the time. And in that, so there are other sectors that are a little bit more challenging, like aviation, as you were just talking about, a little bit more challenging. I mean, the airline industry has promoted this misconception that there's nothing that can be done. That's actually completely false. There's a huge amount that can be done on aviation, just in terms of efficiency improvements and electric and hybrid electric aircraft, which are actually coming online, even in the absence of regulation. And then, of course, it's not just electrification. We need to have clean mass transit that's free or much, much more affordable than it is today, that reduces car ownership and reduces the amount of miles driven. And with that and other investments in our urban cores, we make life better and we rapidly reduce greenhouse pollution. There is so much that can be done, and that is what keeps me going in this work, is that the things that we need to do to solve the climate crisis are the same things that are going to make a safer, better, more equitable world for everybody.
I think that a question I often end up asking people who are involved in the kind of work you're involved in is, you mentioned how for so long these oil executives were lying to us, but and they're still lying, but for the most part, a lot of people, especially younger people, are fully aware that fossil fuels are the problem. This is causing climate change. And it seems to me that one of the ways that people are kind of kept from causing a riot over this is this sort of enforced feeling of helplessness, like, well, there's nothing we can do about it, like it's out of our hands at this point, we just don't control things. So like, how do you deal with that issue? How do you deal with getting people, also with the climate issue? For a lot of people, it seems so abstract, right? We see these big climate events like these forest fire, like these massive like wildfires, but if it doesn't affect you immediately, it's hard to see how it's going to like affect you in the long term. So how do you, as somebody involved in this climate work, get people fired up about this issue? Because it's kind of ironic. The most important issue that could cause like apocalyptic scenarios, and in a lot of parts of the world already has, is hard to get people excited or angry enough about to like be in the streets about it. What do you do about that?
Those are such good points, and that sense of helplessness, that is no accident. The idea that we all bear personal responsibility for climate change and that we would somehow solve climate change through personal actions was manufactured and relentlessly promoted by the fossil fuel industry, right? I mean, of course one will feel helpless if one thinks that one needs to try to solve climate change on our own, because the emissions result from government policy that control the choices that are available to people, not from individual choices. But that's a myth that we live with, and so that's important to keep in mind. And then it's important to keep in mind that the government, the technology, this is never, in my whole career, I've been working on this since the 1990s. It's never been a question of technology. It has always been a question of political will, right? And it's never been a question of not enough information. It's all, it is the relentless opposition from the oil industry at every level of government, blocking the solutions, blocking the alternatives to their dirty products. And so I think understanding that is critical. In our work, my organization works with a national coalition of groups fighting fossil fuel projects across the country at buildbackfossilfree.org. And we are building connections between the individual fossil fuel fights around the country, because the fossil fuel industry is killing us, not just through climate change, of course, but through all phases of the filthy fossil fuel life cycle, the production and the refining and the transport. And so we're coming together to speak together loudly and clearly to President Biden that we are out of time and that he needs to take these actions. It's absolutely achievable, and there is nothing that's more important than what President Biden does in the next 3 years. And we can come together and force him to do that. And I think it's just really, for me, people should get involved in the way that works for them, but it's not about individual action. Do those things if you want to, they're wonderful, but it's about political action, and this is winnable.
Mm-hmm. Well, one final thing before we let you go that I also do want to touch on, and that is the question to some degree of responsibility. I mean, we know that climate finance is a big issue, and I think that's sort of another thing that often gets sort of put out in the discourse is, well, we need to do more, other people need to do more, and, everyone is responsible, and it's not just the United States. And the idea that the United States doesn't have a particular role to play, or B, did not play a particular historic role into getting us to this point, that I think also can kind of trip people up in some of the arguments about taking bold action.
Yeah, climate finance is incredibly important, and there's many pieces of this. And so first, governments need to stop financing and subsidizing fossil fuels. So the fossil fuel industry gets about $5 trillion in subsidies each year globally, tens of billions of dollars from the US government. So that needs to stop. Private investors need to stop financing fossil fuels. That's why you see fossil fuel divestment movements growing and increasingly winning. And then the other piece, as you say, is the ongoing loss and damage around the world from climate's astronomical. And these damages were overwhelmingly caused by the wealthiest countries of the world, led by the United States. They're overwhelmingly suffered in the global south, developing nations, and their costs associated with all the harms we've been talking about, the sea level rise, superstorms, fires, droughts, crop damage, and so forth. And the Biden administration recently pledged to double payments to about $11 billion a year to help pay for this damage. But the fact is that's not nearly enough, and the United States has broken its word many times in the past in this area. And so all that money, those billions of dollars that are going to fossil fuel companies, need to pay for a clean, just energy transition that will help the people who are most suffering from this, and will also help limit the warming instead of feeding the crisis, which is what the government is doing at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, Cassie, it was a pleasure. Really appreciate you joining us here on the show, helping us sort through all these thorny issues. I know your time's very valuable, so thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rania, we're going to keep on banging this drum about climate change and keep on banging the drum for people to do things.
Also,
like
shout out to, I like banging the drum. Also, shout out to those people. I'm glad that she mentioned the personal responsibility thing, because I can't tell you how annoying it is when an obnoxious, liberal type will be like, turn off the AC when it's 100 degrees outside because of climate change. And I'm like, really? First of all, you think that's going to make a difference right now? And second of all, it's really hot. Anyway, so shout out to you, annoying liberal.
Thank you, Rania.
You're welcome. You're welcome for that.
Yes. We're going to shift gears here to another terrible issue, but a very important one, and one that, bears very heavily on our, quote unquote profession here of journalism. That is the ongoing attempt to railroad Julian Assange into prison here in the United States to extradite him from the United Kingdom. And we are very happy to be joined by one of the journalists covering this the closest of anyone, Kevin Gosztola, who's the managing editor of shadowproof.com and also the curator of the dissenter.org newsletter and the co-host of the podcast Unauthorized Disclosure, along with Ronnie Kolick. Kevin, thanks so much for being back with us.
Hey, it's good to talk to both of you.
Well, let us know where we stand now. I think some people may have seen some of the headlines that I guess a judge has approved the extradition. Where do things stand in terms of Mr. Assange's case in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, on one hand, you could call it a formality, but I think it was a dark day for press freedom yesterday on April 20th, when finally a British court authorized and sent the extradition request to the British Home Secretary, the British Home Office, Priti Patel, for her to seriously consider extraditing Julian Assange to the United States. It made this very real. A lot of things that we've been thinking of in the abstract, that is what's going to be happening right now. And Julian Assange's team has 4 weeks to make submissions, put forward evidence, highlight improprieties and how everything has been considered in the process so far. And he's been thoroughly punished by this process. But the fact is, because we're here and because we're having this conversation, it's really alarming. We should not be having this discussion right now about a journalist being sent to the US to be put on trial.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm confused about here, because I'm not entirely confused, but I can imagine other people might be, is this has been going on for the last couple of years where there's this kind of like back and forth where 1 second we're relieved, we're like, okay, so he's not going to be extradited, then there's an appeal, then he is going to be extradited, then that's appealed, and he's not going to be extradited, and on and on and on. So it's hard for people. It's almost like this entire process is made to like lessen the outrage, lessen the blow, so that finally, if he is extradited, people will just be like, well, I have no more outrage. But how serious is this moment, this particular decision, compared to the last several decisions that have come down over the past couple of years that have been appealed? Is it possible for this decision to actually successfully be appealed, or is that unlikely and this is it? This is like he might really be extradited.
So his legal team still has an appeal, and they will be able to, when it comes back. So what happens is over the next 4 weeks or up to 2 months, it'll be looked at. If it's approved, which we can get into the politics of it and why I really think it's highly likely that it will be approved, especially because of what we know about Priti Patel. But to answer your question, it comes back to the district court, which is the first court that heard the main hearing about the extradition request and denied it back on January 4th, 2021. And then finally, what we've been waiting for, what many have been hoping we could see, is a challenge to the conclusions about Julian Assange that were in the majority of that decision. So no longer are we talking about just this side, but very important issue of, would it be oppressive to Julian Assange's mental health? How would he be abused in a US prison? But we get to dig into everything that was wrong about saying Julian Assange is not a journalist and didn't have press freedom rights, and what was at the core of this decision. And to show the politicization of all of this case, how the CIA plotted to kidnap and kill the person who the UK is about to offer up to the United States willingly, which is stunning and something that human rights groups like Amnesty International and others have not ignored in their statements against this case. And we get to focus on also how the extradition treaty is not being interpreted appropriately, because there's an exemption for political offenses. One of those political offenses is espionage. People who are accused of espionage, it is widely considered, country to country, are not likely to be considered spies in, their own home country. It's possible that you're going to see Russia and China accuse people of espionage who are not doing anything but just being in their country. Likewise, that's what can happen with the US. We can see that, people who are from countries that are considered official enemies of the United States get labeled as being people who are engaged in crimes. Well, back home, what they did is not criminal at all. And that's the case for Julian Assange. They get to bring all this up in their appeal.
There's so many elements to this. I mean, the chilling effect seems so huge. I mean, just the extraterritoriality element of it in and of itself. I mean, journalists outside of the United States reporting on the United States now fearing if they're in a quote-unquote friendly country, the United States, they could be extradited. But it seems that, I mean, to me, even just the extradition itself and the putting Assange on trial has a huge chilling effect for anybody thinking about publishing, crimes of the U.S. government now that you just have no idea if you're going to be thrown in prison for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's incredible that what is at the core of a lot of the retaliation against Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are these revelations around war crimes? Are these revelations of torture? Are the revelations around abuses at Guantanamo Bay, the way people were mistreated at prisons, and the way that countries supported the rendition? You have the Khaled al-Masri case. He testified in defense and in support of Julian Assange. And all while we're hearing constantly condemnation of war crimes by Russia. And you're seeing this play out, this case against Julian Assange play out, while the US is like, oh, I don't know if we can support the International Criminal Court because in the past we have opposed it because we don't want to be held accountable for our war crimes. And so while they are trying to extradite a journalist who and target these documents, not these other sets that are less popular, but this set of documents that exposed war crimes, they are also still fighting any future in which they would be held accountable for committing crimes.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. And it's also, happening at a moment where you also have people raising their voices about, when raising your voices about someone like Alexei Navalny, for example, who is, in some sort of prison-like condition in Russia, though I think it's not to the extent that Julian Assange is. But just to give people an idea, how much more severe is what's happening to Julian Assange by these supposedly Western democracies under Western values. How much more serious is this than what the US complains about in other countries? Is there a parallel to it? Or, would you maybe classify this as one of the worst cases of persecuting a journalist, aside from actually killing them, that we have in the world at the moment?
All right, so let me introduce your viewers to Priti Patel. Priti Patel is the Home Secretary who has actually endorsed an expansion of the Official Secrets Acts in the United Kingdom. And that's an actual law that criminalizes the publication of classified information. We don't have that here. We have a First Amendment, supposedly, that we're supposed to all be protected by. But they don't have this, and they've they've used the Espionage Act as like a de facto Official Secrets Act, but they don't have political support in Congress for this law. And so in the UK, they actually do. And they're working to expand it. And Priti Patel supports expanding it so that whistleblowers and journalists could potentially be punished with up to 14 years in jail if they are convicted under this expansion. They're very afraid of calling into question UK security services and also highlighting the way in which the UK security state collaborates with the CIA and other parts of the US government. Priti Patel is also someone, this is thanks to the work done by Declassified UK. Matt Kennard, chief investigator, did a report on Priti Patel and how she used to be on the advisory council for the Henry Jackson Society, a right-wing group in the UK that also counts as one of its members a former CIA director, James Woolsey, who has CIA links. Periodically throughout the last decade, it's been part of this public mobbing campaign against Julian Assange to assassinate his character, to deploy these smears. And she has a past history with this group. And so, as far as Russian persecution of journalists, which I'm not denying happens, versus UK persecution of journalists, they're giving Russia a run for their money because if you look at their country right now, they're also censoring Russian state media outlets. They're going after people and saying if you happen to work for a Russian media, it might actually be a crime that they could come after you for being involved with a Russian state outfit. And now they're extraditing Julian Assange. So we should expect that as far as the reputation goes of the UK and US and whether they have any credibility at all to speak on press freedom matters, that once this happens, if they allow Julian Assange to be put on a plane and approve it, and he's brought and put on trial in the US, we can guarantee ourselves that there will be clip after clip after clip of Russian officials like Vladimir Putin and his inner circle, when they are confronted about, things that involve harassment, intimidation, raids against journalists, crackdowns on independent media, we're going to hear Julian Assange's name out of their mouth repeatedly as a way to excuse what they're doing, to say, you know what, I don't have to talk to you. Look at what you're doing to independent journalists in your country.
I think that's a very good point. And one thing that also, I'm glad you brought up credibility, which I think is we're saying here, is the credibility of the U.S. government in this case has been absurd. I mean, making wild claims about how there's no danger of suicide in U.S. prisons, about how he won't be kept in solitary confinement. I believe that the indictment that was revealed in the Eastern District, which I don't know if anyone's ever gotten a fair trial there. But talk about that if you could, because that's been a sort of bizarro world effect of this for anyone who knows anything about the U.S. criminal legal system.
Yeah, so if he's brought to the United States and put on trial, he gets a trial in the Eastern District of Virginia, which has its base of jurors, draws jurors from people who are working for what Dana Priest and I believe Bill Arkin called top secret America. The people who work for these private security contractors who have jobs, who staff U.S. intelligence agencies, who staff parts of Capitol Hill, these agencies and institutions in Washington, D.C. Those are the people who are going to be asked to serve on a jury. So actually, personally, we're getting very far ahead of ourselves when it comes to this case, but I would think Julian Assange wouldn't want to have a jury during any trial, that he would take his chance with a judge who would review the law and just see if maybe the law works in his favor and if maybe the First Amendment might perhaps spare him from what the U.S. is trying to do. Before this happened and before he was charged, it was actually widely recognized, even by the Congressional Research Service that advises members of Congress on key issues, that there really wasn't an avenue for charging Julian Assange when it came to the publication of documents in 2010 and 2011 that we're talking about, which came from Chelsea Manning. So he wouldn't get a fair trial. He wouldn't get a fair shake. He would be treated just like whistleblowers before him, like Daniel Hale, like John Kiriakou, like Reality Winner, like Thomas Drake, people who came through, as long as the case doesn't collapse on the prosecutors, which is what happened in Thomas Drake's case, as long as they're not embarrassed or shamed, then he would actually be convicted and probably have to serve some time in a prison because he won't have a public interest defense. What was foreclosed for whistleblowers would be foreclosed to Julian Assange because it's not like he would have some additional privilege because he's a journalist. They're saying things that are really alarming in the sense that he's expected to have some obligation to protect documents from a U.S. government agency, any U.S. government agency, even though he never worked for that agency. And even though he's not even a U.S. citizen, he has no allegiance to America, nor should he be expected to have such an allegiance. He never signed any oath or anything like that. And yet they're saying that they can have territorial jurisdiction over him and put him behind bars. And that's something that's really, really alarming. But obviously we know, and I'll wrap up what I'm saying here, obviously we know that the U.S. Justice Department has become very bold and audacious in the last several years. This is what they're doing to Alex Saab when it comes to trying to impose U.S. law against him. And they believe that they can go after anyone and snatch them and bring them back to the U.S. and put them through these political cases. So, we're not even talking about going after and getting people accused of terrorist acts anymore, which is where they were really flaunting their ability to extradite people. It's gone beyond that. It's gone beyond going after people for hacking offenses. And now they're targeting people for journalism.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, all very scary, very worrisome, very troublesome, but certainly the fight is still on. But we really appreciate everything you do to not only cover this story, but keep all of our listeners very well informed. Kevin Gosselaar, thank you so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is really outrageous. And I mean, it is also has to be noted that it seems that they have almost no case. I mean, they can't even prove that Assange is the person who received the documents. That's why they tortured Chelsea Manning for years and years and years to try to get her to reveal that it was Julian Assange that she sent the information to, which she did not, in fact, reveal. it may not be true, but had to face years and years of brutal torture before they've finally let her go, recognize that she wasn't going to turn state's
now,
evidence.
and now we should be clear too. As what's happening to Julian Assange is
Yeah.
torture. I mean, they're just they're torturing him to death. Like,
Absolutely.
I think they know they don't have. They're not stupid. They know the law. They have like the world's top like minds on this. They know that they don't have a case. They're just keeping this guy in like a permanent state of legal limbo where
Yeah.
he is like he's just being held and getting sicker and more just like having his mental health torn to shreds. I mean, like what would happen to any of us in this kind of situation? They're just trying to kill him slowly, and so that's a part of the punishment. It's taking
Totally.
place as we speak. And
Yeah,
it's
not to
just,
mention
yeah,
they've
it's
driven
horrifying.
Edward Snowden out of the country. I mean,
Right.
but every possible person who has been in the government responsible for thousands of people killed in drone strikes, millions of people dead
Nothing.
in Iraq, sanctions, all of that. Not only are they walking around, but they're widely celebrated in our society. And then the same people who will spend all day on CNN or MSNBC or whatever praising Madeleine Albright after she passed are the same people who are going to say Julian Assange is the worst person on the planet Earth and that he should be put in
Right.
prison, even though as far as we know, he's never killed anybody. And,
Right.
it's funny now if you look at the New York Times, the Washington Post, all of whom continue to use WikiLeaks as a source in their reporting, because how could you not?
Yeah.
It's a very important source. They used to mention WikiLeaks. Now they will often mention, and I want people to watch this when you read the news, as mentioned in diplomatic cables. So they don't even mention it, even though they're
That's a
sitting
good
there
point.
searching
They do
it
that.
and looking at it. And I'm like, well, what diplomatic cables? Like, obviously they're using WikiLeaks and they don't want people to know that very valuable information that was revealed is still, sort of building. Now, I will say the New York Times editorial board did come out against this. I don't know what the Post has said. Knowing the Post, though, they're probably for it. They probably want to burn Julian Assange at the stake. But
well, all these people at the end of the day do, because they also think they believe he got Trump elected because they're also delusional.
yeah. Well, and also he
but-
embarrassed them. I mean, the reality
Yes.
is Julian Assange ripped the mask off of access journalism. And most
Right.
investigative reporting into national security stuff is access journalism, where powerful people
Exactly.
basically will give you information if you are willing to more or less, do things the way they're going to do. I know that there's a lot of criticism around Glenn Greenwald and pieces like that, and I've made my own criticisms, but he did put out an amazing piece. This might have been 6 years ago, and it was quoting the NPR national security reporter, and she was saying at some panel how people should just trust the government and just trust that these sources are right. And look, I'm not trying to just bash all journalists. It's hard to get secret documents. So many people are trying to trade access to get things, and many positive things are brought to light in this way. But it also means that you're being very controlled in terms of how messagings are slipping out. Sometimes something's leaked to you in order. I mean, you look at what happened with Watergate. That is what happened. The FBI was pissed that LBJ and all these other people were encroaching on their territory, so they leaked what happened from the White House with the plumbers to the Washington Post to take down Nixon. I mean, it was, the different elements of the state going after one another.
I mean, even now, you look at now with like all of these anonymous officials says that there's like some countries trying to hack us. So be scared. Anonymous official says that Iran is running an operation to convince Americans to vote a certain way. And it's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like one of the most sanctioned countries in the world is running an influence operation to change votes. I highly, or even WMD scandal with Iraq. I mean, you had Dick Cheney's office literally leaking things to reporters and then citing that in press conferences, being like, well, the New York Times reported. It's like,
Shameful.
I mean, yeah, you're being played, but at the same time, some of these people want to be played because they're friends with the people that are their sources. They get drinks together. They go to each other's, kids' birthday parties, and they went to school together, and they're a part of a certain class of elites. And anyways, we could do a whole episode on just that, because the point is, though, Julian Assange did embarrass the news media because he did their job for them. And then a bunch of them even won Pulitzer Prizes for WikiLeaks documents that they wouldn't
The
have won
old
without
school
Julian
time.
Assange. Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's switch gears here to another important issue just to the south of us, some of the important political developments in Mexico. And we are very, very honored to be joined by one of the most fantastic journalists out there, Alina Duarte, who is an independent journalist and also a senior research fellow at the Council on Hemispheric Affairs. Alina, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thanks for inviting me. My pleasure to be here with you all the times that we need to be here. So thank you again.
No, thank you. A lot happening in Mexico. I want to start here with the lithium issue. Obviously, this is a major issue given that lithium is the main, the ingredient for electric batteries for electric cars. Mexico recently, I believe, nationalized lithium. Maybe just explain to us, what exactly happened first, and then also what it means for Mexico as a country.
Well, it's a long debate. I must say that I'm really happy to see these kind of debates now in Mexico under AMLO's administration. It's something that I couldn't have imagined 2 years ago that something like this would happen. There are two specific moments about this discussion. The first one was the one that we, or maybe everyone, saw at the Congress last Sunday. It was the congressmen tried to approve an electrical reform. That was the first reform. There's the electrical reform and the miner reform about the lithium. So they wanted to approve this electrical reform that did not nationalize the electrical industry. And even when we were not asking for the nationalization, the Mexican state should have the control of 54%, 56% of the national the electrical industry, and the initiative, the private initiative, could participate with 44%. It was enough. It was enough to start a big campaign against AMLO's administration. So it wasn't approved at the Congress a week ago. We saw that this reform had 275 votes in favor, 223 against, and it was a debate that lasted 12 hours, and it was a big mobilization outside the Congress. It was just amazing, but they needed more than 300 voters, so it didn't happen. The electrical reform didn't pass. So the next day, last Monday, we saw the president in the Mañanera, this conference that he gives all the mornings here in Mexico, sending a new initiative to the Congress, and then it passed to the Senate. It was this initiative about the lithium. Even when we had an article in our Constitution, of course, the 27th article that says that the ownership of the lands and waters included within the limits of the national territory corresponds originally to the nation, which has had and has the right to transfer ownership of them to individuals constituting private property. It was not enough. During the last decades, what we saw was just the neoliberal governments just giving our territory to the transnational, specifically to the US and Canadian enterprises and companies. So he was trying to nationalize, because we need to say that currently there are already companies exploring the lithium in our country, in the north of Mexico, basically. So with this reform, the Mexican government now reserves the right to withdraw the companies, the permits, to exploit the lithium. We know that this is one of the most important minerals nowadays, and it caused a coup against Evo Morales in Bolivia. And also, I was so happy to listen to President López Obrador saying that, remembering the coup in Bolivia. We have heard a lot of investigations, the declarations of Evo Morales saying that a very important part of the coup in October 2019 was the lithium. And we remember also Elon Musk saying, just deal with it. We're going to give the coups that we want. So that's why it's so important, this discussion. I think this is the most important discussion that we have had under these 3 years with AMLO. And I think he has been radicalized, his speech, but also his actions. So I'm really happy at seeing these kind of debates now in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Alina, is there some sort of discussion also about the potential ramifications? Because like you just mentioned, you did have Elon Musk threaten to coup any government that takes over its own lithium. Lithium is obviously a very important resource that many people with power want to get their hands on for very cheap. So is there a discussion of how to deal with the potential blowback for a decision like this, which is a very important decision, of course, but the reality that we live in is one of imperialism. And certainly there are forces, particularly in America, who in the US and North America and Canada as well, who are looking at this and who are very upset about it, I'm sure.
I mean, the government has been always saying about the role of the corporate media here in Mexico and the international role that I have been during the last months specifically. They've been attacking AMLO's administration because of this reform. It's not a coincidence. We've seen exactly the same in Bolivia. We've seen exactly the same with the oil in Venezuela and everywhere. So now it's really important what you're asking, because what we saw in Bolivia in 2006 after the nationalization of the resources, it was also a new company of the state, like a national company of to explore and to exploit the lithium. And it's gonna be exactly the same. Actually, that's one of the arguments, quote unquote, of the opposition, say that we want to be a dictatorship like in Bolivia and in Venezuela, because we are following kind of following these steps, building our own company. So we're gonna have, that's the plan of the government, to build a new company ruling by the Mexican state for the lithium. And it's pretty important to say that, because we are not only taking control of the lithium to give it again to the transnationals or to Canadian companies or something like that. So we are going to be the ones who are going to explore, and that's why it's so like, I think the campaign against AMLO, it's so cruel, it's amazing. The Washington Post, the New York Times are every single day just attacking AMLO's administration with these so-called journalists that they are writing every single day against the administration. So it's pretty important to say, and also it's pretty important to say that I haven't seen this kind of debates in the streets in my country here in Mexico for the last decade. This is the first time that you go out in the streets and you talk to people, to everyone, and everyone. It's just amazing. Everyone is just debating about the what's next in this country. AMLO has, and it's also pretty important to say that he has 70%, even in conservative polls, he has 65% of approval. And, after a pandemic, it's just something that it's almost impossible to have a president with 70% of approval in this country, and with this kind of reforms, and people are just debating through social networks, in the streets, are now again mobilizing. And it's also I think important to say that this is a moment very critical for Morena, the party in power, because they couldn't approve this first reform for having the control of the electrical industry in this country, because they were pretty sure that they were gonna win in 2021 all the Congress. They didn't. Now people are asking them just to reconsider the candidates, to reconsider the strategy, to move forward with this so-called fourth transformation in this country. So it's a very important moment for the life here in a political way in Mexico, and everyone is talking about this. AMLO has a lot of support. It happened, a referendum happened 2 weeks ago, and he won with more of 90% of approval. It was also just something that couldn't happen before in this country. It was the first time that we had a referendum like this, and almost 16 million people voted. And I mean, there's a critical moment here that we just can go forward for more, not only reforms, but in every single way, we just can go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, certainly I think the concept of the fourth transformation is certainly very much in swing. And, Alina, you have been covering for many years the entire Latin American scene. I mean, where does what's happening in Mexico now, do you think, fit into the broader moment we're seeing, sort of what seems to be a resurgence of progressive activity across the Central and South America?
I hope so. AMLO, what I was saying in foreign policy, in the Mexican foreign policy, we've seen a radical change. I remember AMLO 3 years ago saying that the best foreign policy was the intern, the local, the national policy, and now we're seeing an AMLO that is strengthening relations with even not maybe with Venezuela, because it's the campaign against Venezuela, as in all over the world, is the same here in Mexico. And but I've seen a Mexican president now trying to establish like a deeper relationships with Honduras, for example, with Xiomara Castro, with Alberto Fernandez in Argentina, even with Russia under the pandemic, and China. It was. We got a lot of vaccines from Russia and China, and also Mexico sent a lot of vaccines to Central America during the pandemic. So I've seen a radical. Even if you listen to the speech that AMLO gave during the anniversary of the Simon Bolivar last year, it was, I think, the most radical speech he has gave during his administration, saying that we need a Latin American or a continental organization, a free trade area for Latin America. He was questioning the OAS. In the OAS, our ambassador, she's amazing. She's always questioning Almagro. So a lot has changed during these 3 years. And now, after the referendum, after this reform, I hope that something more radical becomes here in Mexico, and I think it's gonna happen. AMLO is gonna travel to Central America next month, also to Argentina. AMLO, do you remember the only country that he has visited was the U.S., or first with Trump and now with Biden, and he hasn't gone to another country. So it says a lot that now he wants to have a meeting with Xiomara Castro, with Alberto Fernandez in person. I think he knows now the importance of Latin America. So I hope that we can see a more radical foreign policy of Mexico, and that we can see also the start of a new organization. They were questioning the OAS, and they made the CELAC the first organization to make relationships with the South. So let's see what happens. I'm really confident that something good for good is gonna happen now with these 3 years, the last 3 years of his administration.
Mm-hmm. Well, Alina, as always, we really appreciate you, joining us for sure. As always, I just want to commend you for your shirt. Fantastic shirt, by the way. But definitely, being able to inform us on everything in Mexico and all across Latin America. I hope people actually check out your interview with Evo Morales, that he spoke about this lithium issue. But thanks again. Really appreciate you joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for inviting me. It's always, as I said at the beginning, it's a pleasure to collaborate with you guys. I admire you a lot. So hope I can see you both here in Mexico reporting from the ground.
We're looking forward to it. And one other piece that I do also want to say as well on that piece there, talking about the OAS that Alina mentioned, is that upcoming in June of this year, the OAS is going to be meeting in LA, and there is going to be a counter summit, a people's summit happening there at the same time during the same week. I think it starts, I'm not even going to say, it's in June. People's Summit, look it up. I don't want to get it wrong. But nevertheless, I think it's going to be fantastic. There are going to be people coming from all over Latin America, June 8th through 10th. There are people coming from all over Latin America, people coming from all over the United States to be a part of this move to say that this old imperial OAS way of doing things got to get out of the door. And, the U.S. especially needs to get on the side of where the people are in Latin America, which is moving into a very different modality in terms of a people-centered, not a profit-centered world. You can see there in the bottom, peoplesummit2022.org, peoplesummit2022.org. Rania.
June 8th to 10th, I've been told by the organizers who are watching as we speak.
Yeah.
No, it's June 8th to June 10th, the People's Summit in LA. The other thing that we should mention, Eugene, it just came to my attention as well, that after the last episode of this show, we got 5 new patrons. Did you know that?
Wow. I did
I
not
didn't know that.
that.
No one.
I did not know that.
I just learned this
but
information. Just now, I'm
Patreon.com/breakthrough news. You know, honestly, I think if we had 5 after the last show, let's see if we can beat that. You know, I'm all about positive competition, not negative competition. We're not capitalist here, but it is good to compete to see who can do the best for good causes. So 5 people after the show last week became patrons. So I don't know who the 6 to 100 people who are watching right now who are become patrons after this, but you can go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. That's patreon.com/breakthrough news and become a patron. We would greatly, greatly appreciate it. So patreon.com/breakthrough news. If you're watching on YouTube, also make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the bell so you get the alerts. But as always, Rania, that brings us to a close here in the show. As always, it was my pleasure to be here alongside you.
The pleasure was all mine.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing that. Nevertheless, shout out to the whole Breakthrough News team who makes this show possible on a weekly basis. And we will be back with you next week.
Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.